chapter of Tehillim we say to start, and then we make the bracha. See, before he made the bracha, the Rebbe said to him, "Okay, so would you stop the boat now?" So he said yes. So the boat started moving, and he stopped it. But he also was a smart man. He said to the Alter Rebbe, now that I realize Alter Rebbe is a tzaddik, he said, Alter Rebbe, and what are you going to give me if I stop the boat? What will I get from it? So Alter Rebbe promised him a bracha. Not only promised him, he wrote it down on a piece of paper, and he gave him a bracha that he'll live long and he'll have promotion in his position, and he should have wealth. 3 beautiful brachas. The Frierdiker Rebbe said whenever he heard the story, he was always wondering, why did the Alter Rebbe have to allow him the boat should move again and ask him to stop it? What would he need his favors for? Once the Alter Rebbe stopped the boat, then he could have done the bracha and didn't need his favor. Especially that initially he didn't want to stop the boat. So the Frierdiker Rebbe answered the question, and the Rebbe spoke about this quite a few times also, is why did the Alter Rebbe want the boat to stop? Because when you daven, you make a bracha, you have to be able to concentrate. In order to concentrate, you have to be settled. When the boat is moving, it's rocking, it's shaking, it's not stable, so it can affect your concentration. But Alter Rebbe, especially when you study Chassidus, we understand the importance of learning Torah and doing mitzvahs, dafka in a gashmizdika world, a world which is a natural world, the world the way we know it. And in this lowest world, we're doing the mitzvahs. If he would be making the bracha over the boat that was stopped, miraculously, that wouldn't be the complete way of doing the mitzvah, because it's a miraculous world, so to speak. Alter Rebbe wanted to do the mitzvah in a natural world. So first he showed this man that he could stop it. Then he agreed to stop it. So it was stopped in a natural way. And then he made the bracha. And the Frierdiker Rebbe said that there was a chassid that he once met a descendant of this captain. Everybody okay? His name was Rabbi Zev Wolf of Yekaterinoslav, happens to be the city where the Rebbe comes from. And he showed him a beautiful picture frame with the written piece of paper, the Alter Rebbe's handwriting, and he told him the story how the Alter Rebbe gave him this bracha. And he said that's actually what happened. He was promoted to a higher position, he became wealthy, and he lived a long life. The Alter Rebbe said that when they brought him for questioning, the first question was, are you a follower of the Baal Shem Tov? And the Alter Rebbe said that if he would have answered no, that would have been it. They would have freed him and he would have gone home. I'm not sure exactly why, but apparently part of the accusation and everything involved had to do with the fact that he was a follower of the Baal Shem Tov. But the Alter Rebbe said, I didn't want to detach myself from the Baal Shem Tov, even if it was only external words, and even if it was only for a moment, and even if this would mean that I'd be able to go home and not have to suffer in that jail, because I didn't want to disconnect from the Baal Shem Tov. They asked the Alter Rebbe different questions, why does he do this, and why does he do that, and so on. Alter Rebbe also said that when the Alter Rebbe would daven, there's a certain sound that he would make. It sounded like af, somehow between the words af. So in their accusation, they wrote that in Hebrew, af means wrath. And they said the Alter Rebbe is praying that God should send his wrath on the Tsar and his government. That's how they interpret it. The real reason why the Alter Rebbe had that sound was because the Baal Shem Tov made that sound. And here too, the Alter Rebbe said that he could have given them some sort of other reason just to brush them off, At the end, he told him the reason why the Baal Shem Tov had that sound. And again, the Alter Rebbe said, I didn't want to disconnect myself even from a nuance of the Baal Shem Tov and not tell them the truth. I think we can learn a lot from that in terms of what it means to be connected to a Rebbe. Alter Rebbe said one of the things that sort of tortured him more than anything else was, we know that Chassidus was new, and that's why there was so much opposition of people against learning Chassidus. Imagine you're standing here in front of not great tzaddikim, not even Yidden, Russian people that are part of the authority, and you have to explain them concepts of Chassidus. And the way they understood things in their very coarse way of understanding such lofty spiritual subjects was very painful for the Alter Rebbe. But that's what needed to be done, that they should understand it from their perspective. And we'll soon see a little bit more about that particular idea. But then it came to something very sensitive, and when that is at the end of the first chapter of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe writes that non-Jews, they come from Shalosh Klipos Atmeis, and therefore they don't have in them any godliness, like the Klip in a Yid is Klipos Nega. The Klip in a non-Jew is Shalosh Klipos Atmeis. They asked him, how do you explain that? Instead of answering the question, Alter Rebbe smiled. He smiled, he said, okay, we'll go to the next question. But what does it mean? The Alter Rebbe said that the smile meant, listen, you asked me 21 questions. I answered them favorably, you understood them, you appreciated it. It was explained in a way that made sense to you. I don't think you want me to explain this that it makes sense to you, so let's go to the next question. And the judge took it that way, and they went on to the next question. And by the way, even though it says in Tanya that Shalach that means there's no good, the word good over there doesn't mean good the way we know it, being a good person. It's talking about godliness, that there's a certain level of godliness. Of course, a person who is from another nation could have in him attribute of kindness and goodness, and there's so many people who demonstrated that, and not only demonstrated that, but went to the extent of endangering their lives sometimes to help other people. Even in Germany during the Holocaust, there were non-Jews who saved Jews, knowing that if they were caught, it would cost them their lives. So goodness and kindness, of course, they could have, but he's talking about a certain level of open godliness that's only found either in a Nefesh Elokis or in the Nefesh Bahamas, that's Klipas Nega. During the time that the Alter Rebbe was arrested, it's very interesting to note that, of course, everybody in the family was broken, and Mitzel Rebbe, who in general had poor health, he had a condition with his lung, a condition with his heart. The Mitzel Rebbe more than once fainted just from all the agony. The one who was the strongest and the one who gave everybody else strength was actually the Alter Rebbe's mother, whose name was Rebbe Tzarifka. She was the strongest, and there was one time where the Mitzel Rebbe was like either fainted or was going to faint, or woke up from a faint, and she said to him, I swear to you, because she wanted him to be strong, that my father came to me and he told me, this week your father is going out of jail. So obviously she also was not an ordinary woman. And even though when the Alter Rebbe first got married, his mother-in-law, this was his Alter Rebbe's mother, right, not Alter Rebbe's mother-in-law. That's another story, but I won't go there. We're going to get lost. Anyway, remember, we said that the Alter Rebbe wrote a note that it's me. He wrote a note when the chassid asked, I want to know who's eating from my food. And then he added, and someone should immediately go to Vilna. Again, Vilna was the city which was the headquarters of all the activities to oppose Chassidus. And that's because in that city there was also the Vilna Gaon, who was the one at the head of opposition against Chassidus. And the Alter Rebbe said someone should go the immediately. He had no idea why to go, but he understood something is going to be happening and it's necessary for a chassid to be there. So one of the chassidim went there. Nobody knew that he's a chassid because outwardly everybody looks the same. And he was sitting in the shul, listening to conversations to hear if there's anything that's important for him to know. What happened was that they asked the Alter Rebbe a question. I think this was the question about Malchus. Why does he write that Malchus is the lowest thing? So the accuser said that by doing that, he wanted to degrade royalty and kingdom and put down the Tsar. Really, that's such a distortion. Malchus is a sphera, and it's based on the teachings of Kabbalah. It's not the Alter Rebbe's innovation. It's been there all the time, but they used that. They took advantage of their ignorance to be able to accuse the Alter Rebbe of all these different things. So Alter Rebbe said, this is a deep question. I can only answer it in writing. And the Alter Rebbe wrote it in Hebrew. So they sent it to professional people that are translators. One of those professional translators was in Vilna. And he overheard a conversation, how people were talking about it, that the professional translator in Vilna received something from the authorities and it has to do with the Alter Rebbe's arrest. And they're going to speak to him about translating in such a way that would put the Alter Rebbe in a bad light. And so when he heard that, he went to this translator and he basically told him why he's here. And he said to him, the Alter Rebbe is a great tzaddik, and this is a false accusation. It's lack of knowledge. They're mistaking. And I'm begging you not to do anything that's going to chas v'sholem put the Alter Rebbe in danger. So the translator said to him, first of all, I already gave an oath that I'm going to translate everything honestly, so I can't do it differently. Second of all, they send this letter not only to me, but to another translator. So if I write something different, then it's going to be a contradiction. And third of all, it's very difficult to change the Alter Rebbe because his words are so precise. Every word is so precise. You really have to do somersaults to be able to make changes there. But nevertheless, he said, listen, the Alter Rebbe told me to come here. I had no idea why. You see, he's a godly person, and he knew that I would need to be here. And I'm begging you, please, all I'm asking you is to be honest. So he said, listen, if you don't trust me, come here tomorrow. I'll let you be in another room, and you'll hear my conversation with the other group of people, and you'll see that I'm going to be honest. And that's what happened. He was in the other room, and the time they made up, at a certain time in the morning, the group came, and they were telling him it came with 3,000 ruble, which is an enormous sum in those days. And they told him he's going to have a big mitzvah because he's going to help eliminate evil from this world. He'll have reward in this world. He'll have reward in the next world. And he was telling them that he really doesn't want to change it. He wants to be honest. And they insisted and persisted. And finally, he said, okay, I'll do as you're asking. And they left. The chassid heard the conversation. He was devastated. He told them he was going to do as they asked. So he came out again and fell on the floor and was crying and begging and pleading. And he said to them, listen, if I really had intention to do that, would I tell you to be here in the room and listen? I'm going to do what they said. I'm going to write up a letter. But I'm also going to write a translation, which is an honest translation. And the one that I'm going to send to Petersburg is going to be the honest translation. And the other one will stay with me. And if you have any doubts, you can walk with me together, and I'll show you how I put this one into the mail. And that's what happened. And basically, by him being there, that prevented that they shouldn't, chas v'shalom, distort the Alter Rebbe's words, and would come out that he's actually saying things that are degrading against the Russian government. when the time came for the Alter Rebbe to be released, and they saw the Alter Rebbe is really innocent, it was on a Tuesday, and they gave the final verdict that he's going free. They asked the Alter Rebbe, where do you want to go? Because the protocol in the jail was that when somebody leaves the jail, the guards have to bring the person to their apartment. The Alter Rebbe didn't live in Petersburg, so where do you want to go? The Alter Rebbe said he wants to go to the home of Rabbi Majeski. We mentioned his name before. He was the chassid that prepared food for the Alter Rebbe. So they took the Alter Rebbe, both guards, and they brought him to that apartment. They made a little mistake, and that was that this house where the chassid lived, there was an upstairs and a downstairs. And upstairs was someone who was not a chassid. Not only not a chassid, he was actually one of the people in opposition to the Alter Rebbe. In fact, it could even be that he was involved in getting the Alter Rebbe arrested. And the Rabbi Majeski lived downstairs. And they made a mistake, and they brought the Alter Rebbe to the upstairs apartment. Apparently, they opened the door, and they had to bring him into the apartment. When this person saw the Alter Rebbe, he was in shock because he was hoping the Alter Rebbe would be in jail and they would do the thing that they expected them to do. So he was in shock to see the Alter Rebbe was released from jail. And he immediately slammed the door shut. And basically, the Alter Rebbe was held hostage there for three hours. What happened during these 3 hours? The Alter Rebbe said, there were more torture to me than all the 53 days that I was in jail. Why was it? Because this person, as he was talking to the Alter Rebbe, was basically talking against the Baal Shem Tov, against the Mezritcher Magid, against Chassidus, blaspheming everything that has to do with Torah and Chassidus. He was a firm Jew. He was maybe even a Torah scholar, but against Chassidus. And the Alter Rebbe said, it's one thing when you hear questions coming from the mouths of people in Russia, of the Russian authorities, but there's another thing when you hear such negative words coming out of the mouth of your own brother. It's so much more painful. And the Alter Rebbe said that this was worse to him and more painful to him than all the 53 days in jail, which he also referred to as Yisurei Mavis, which means devastating suffering that he had. What happened at the end was that the Hasidim, went to Rabbi Majeski and he said, no, the Alter Rebbe never came. So they went back to the jail. They said, no, we released him from jail. They went back to Rabbi Majeski and he said, no, he never came. Maybe they got stuck on the way. Maybe they got lost. They waited, and they looked and they searched. They couldn't find him, not here, not there. Apparently, one of the times that they went back to the house, they heard screaming, and they heard this person who was against Chassidus screaming and saying, why did you change the words of the davening? Oh, when they heard that, they realized he must be talking to the Alter Rebbe. And they immediately realized the mistake that happened. So they went upstairs to his apartment, and they basically demanded that he open the door, and he did not want to open the door. And they told him if he doesn't open the door will be opened in other ways. And then he opened the door, and a very interesting thing happened. And the Alter Rebbe said, the Gemara says that you're supposed to give honor to your host. He was my host for the last 3 hours here. So I'll drink a cup of tea in his house. And that person poured the Alter Rebbe a cup of tea. The Alter Rebbe drank it, and the Alter Rebbe left. But it's interesting, something related to the mimer that we learned. There's a letter from the Rebbe to a Chabad Chassid who wrote the Rebbe that he's in a certain city. He's teaching Chassidus, spreading Chassidus the way he's supposed to. But there are certain individuals there who are against Chassidus, and these people are really undermining everything he does. And it's very aggravating, very frustrating, and he's complaining. So the Rebbe says to him, the reason why they're able to do what they're doing is only because you're giving them substance. If you wouldn't give them any substance and just ignore them, you'll see that they won't be getting in your way. Then the Alter Rebbe added that even the story with the Alter Rebbe, that he drank tea in the house of this person, later years, the Alter Rebbe said he regrets that he drank the tea, because by doing that, he gave substance to the opposition. So even that he shouldn't have done. So this is related to the Maimon that we learned about, that a Nisayan is something that you don't give it any substance in any way whatsoever.
Didn't one of the other Hasidim, but not the Babish Hasidim, beat him up or something?
Right, they say that one of the Hasidim wanted to physically hit him, because you can imagine what they felt like. They walked in and saw the Alter Rebbe said that he was suffering more than 53 days. But the Alter Rebbe said no. But there was another chassid there, was not a chassid of the Alter Rebbe. And he said, I'm not the Alter Rebbe's chassid, I don't have to listen. And he did what the first person wanted to do. Yeah. It's also interesting that one of the questions this Misnagid said to the Alter Rebbe was, he said to him that, where did you get the audacity to call yourself Chassidim? Because the term Chassid in Gemara, and even in these places in Tehillim, David HaMelech calls himself a Chassid. Chassid means someone was pious, something was really extraordinary in his righteousness. Where do you get the audacity to call yourself Chassidim? The Alter Rebbe answered that actually we didn't give ourselves the name Chassidim. Our opponents are the ones that called us Chassidim, which is Hashgacha Pratis. Because really, they should have called us, the word for the opponents in Hebrew is Misnagdim. Misnagdim means someone who's in opposition, an opponent. Really, we're the ones who should have been the opponents. We're introducing something new. Instead, they called themselves the opponents, and they called us Chassidim. And why do they call Chassidim Chassidim? I guess because they maybe meant it in a derogatory way, like they think they're extra holy or something. But at the end of the day, this was Hashgacha Pratis that Chassidim were called Chassidim. But because of this story, we celebrate Yud Tes Kislev 2 days. The 19th of Kislev and the 20th of Kislev. Because the Alter Rebbe was released from jail on the 19th of Kislev. It was a Tuesday, but it was in the late afternoon, close to sundown. So when he went into the house of this person, and he was there for 3 hours, basically he went out of his house on the 20th of Kislev. And being that the Alter Rebbe said that it being in his house hostage was worse than all the 53 days in the jail, so it means that there's 2 reasons to celebrate. One is the going out of the jail, and the second is going out of the house and being freed from hostage from this particular individual. And it leads us to another story with Tanya. We know that the Tanya was printed 2 years before the Alter Rebbe was arrested. And that's also connected to a story. Alter Rebbe did not want to print the Tanya. So how was it done then? It was written form. I don't know if you ever saw how Sforim came out in those days. It was actually written, and they made copies of the writing. I'll bring in something into the school tomorrow. I'll show you certain Maimorim we still have from those days, what it looked like. It was written by a scribe, and they made copies of it. So one of the things that the Misnagdim did was they also made copies of Tanya, but they changed certain things, very subtle changes. But by making these little changes, it turned things around and to mean something negative. Or you need sometimes to change one letter or change one word, and the definition could be the opposite. The Gemara says, actually this is in Gemara, that Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. It means Hashem is one. There's another passage that says, don't bow down l'keil acher, to another god. So Hashem Echad is belief in Hashem, one God. Hashem Acher is Avodah Zarah, is idol worship. But it's actually very similar, right? It's interesting. It sounds like some sort of a gematria or some sort of a interesting word, but it's in Gemara. The Gemara says you can either build the world or destroy the world with a little dot. Here's the word. This is how you spell Echad. Aleph, Ches, Dalet. This means Hashem is one. Then the other word is don't worship other gods, Kel Acher. So the Aleph and the Aleph are the same. The Ches and the Ches are the same. The Dal and the Resh are almost the same. The only difference is this little thing. So the Gemara says, imagine if a sofa writes this down, a scribe with ink, and a fly comes and sits down over here and erases this dot. It becomes Acher. Or the opposite, where it says, this one actually says Echad, right? It becomes Acher. Or the same thing over here, it would say, don't bow down to one God if the ink is stuck to the feet and he puts the spot right over there. So what I'm bringing out is that sometimes a little tiny dot could make the difference between believing in Hashem or idolatry. So certainly when you take a book like Tanya, which talks all about Hashem, and you change a word, or you change a letter. So the Alter Rebbe, initially when that happened, that's when they started considering the only way to prevent this from happening is by printing the Tanya. When you print something, you can't make changes. But they weren't 100% sure that these mistakes were intentional. Maybe when you rewrite things, you make a mistake, people copy. So one time there was a fair, a business fair, and there were two chassidim that attended. One was a Pinchas Reizes, the other one was Rabbi Yama Kletzker. These were the biggest chassidim of the Alter Rebbe. They knew Tanya inside out. And they saw someone there selling the Tanya. First they were excited. They thought it's a chassid of the Alter Rebbe. But as they got into a conversation, he clearly said to them, because he thought they were not chassidim also, he said to them that, we changed the word here and we changed the word there. I have 600 copies with me, and I'm going to spread it out over here. And they realized, now they heard with their own ears that he's saying that these were not mistakes, but intentional distortions. So they said to him, listen, we have a lot of connections here. We'll get it around much better than you. We'll buy off all your copies. They were businessmen. And you're free. We'll get it to places that you'll never get it to. He was very excited. He sold them all the 600 copies. And they brought it to the Alter Rebbe. And then the Alter Rebbe agreed that it should be printed. When did he give the green light? He gave the green light at the end of Elul. The end of the month of Elul. But he said, I'll only do it on the condition that there are two of my colleagues will agree that it should be printed. One was a Bzush of Anepala, and one was Rabbi Yehuda Leib. And if you look in the Tanya, you'll see the first part of Chitas, we're reading their consent, that they give their bracha and their consent that it should be printed. But how much time do they have? The Alter Rebbe said, I want it to be printed on the yard side of the Mezritch Magid, Yud Tes Kislev. So that's not much time, because the end of Elul, then you have Rosh Hashanah, you have Yom Kippur, and you have Yom Tovim, a whole month. And then it's Kislev is already a month and a half later. The Alter Rebbe kept rushing it. And finally, they brought the first copies to the Alter Rebbe, not on Yud Tes Kislev, but the day after, Chav Kislev. The Alter Rebbe looked at it and said, he quoted a pasuk where it says, there are many thoughts in the mind of a person, but what Hashem wants, at the end, that's what happens. And then he said, I wanted it to be printed on Yud Tes Kislev, the day of my Rebbe's yard site. But Hashem made it being printed on Chav Kislev. And then he said 3 times, Chav Kislev, Chav Kislev, Chav Kislev, and it let out a very deep sigh. And everybody was puzzled, shocked. He's so aggravated. What's the difference if it's this day or it's that day, just a day later? And the Chassidim said later, when the Alter Rebbe ended up in this person's house and suffered, it was like equivalent to being in jail again. They all understood that had the Tanya been printed on the right time, that would have prevented him from having to go through the second set of suffering on Chav Kislev. I just want to add, I forgot what year that was. Maybe I wrote it down somewhere here. There was in the 1980s, the Rebbe requested that they reprint the first edition of Tanya. When the Alter Rebbe wrote the Tanya, it was one edition. It wasn't printed. It was just written. And then the Alter Rebbe changed it and made a second edition of Tanya. And that's the one that's printed. What year was this? in the beginning of the 1980s. And
82.
I'm not sure exactly. Yeah, it was actually 81, not 82, 81. Tafshim and Beis. Never came back from the oil, and it was Mitzvah Shabbos Vayishlach, like now. So you're already in Kislev, and the Rebbe said, "I want you to reprint the first edition and have it ready by Yud Tes Kislev." It sounded impossible. There's just not enough time to go through it, comb through it. It's in written form, make it in printed form, have it ready. The people who worked on it did not leave the office almost for 24 hours. Every day they were there till Yud Tes Kislev. One of my brother-in-laws was one of the people working on it. Pashta, they didn't come home. They were there every second until the last moment before Shabbos and the first moment after Shabbos. And it was ready on Yud Tes Kislev. And the Rebbe was very pleased. And the Rebbe spoke about it. And the Rebbe said that by having it ready now on Yud Tes Kislev, this was a way of a tikkun to correct the fact that the Alter Rebbe, many years ago, didn't have it ready on Yud Tes Kislev. Whatever that means, a little bit beyond their understanding. And I think that was one of the rare times you heard the Rebbe say that he wants to give a special thank you to the wives of all the people that were working on it because they just weren't home for 2-3 weeks. Anyway, so this is what happened with this person, and as they say, when there's darkness, it brings a greater light. So actually, because they distorted it, because they made those distortions, that's what led to the Alter Rebbe printing it. And once it was printed, it was sort of spread even much more. Now, I'm not sure if this happened this time or the second time, because Alter Rebbe was arrested a second time. But I think it was, I'm not sure, one of those 2 times, the person said to the Alter Rebbe, "I want you to give me a tkiyas kav." Tkiyas kav means a handshake. In Torah, a handshake is like a binding commitment. Give me a handshake that you're going to visit 3 people who are the greatest leaders in the Lithuanian world, and to debate with them the subject of Chassidus, if it's a good thing or not a good thing. And the Alter Rebbe gave the handshake, made the commitment, and he met with 3 of those 3 leaders, and each one that he met with turned out that as a result of that, they had the greatest respect and awe for the Alter Rebbe. But one particular story with someone was called Rabbi Shua Tzeitlin, and when he heard the Alter Rebbe is coming to visit him, he was happy to give an opportunity to really see who he is. But he decided to do something to sort of test him. There's a passage where it says, which means Hashem protects tzaddikim, that they won't be stumbling to do an aveira. In other words, the tzaddik will never do an aveira intentionally, but couldn't something happen that by mistake, without his knowledge, not being aware, something would go wrong? But if he's a real tzaddik, Hashem will protect him that wouldn't happen. So he wanted to see how real of a tzaddik he is. Prepared food on the table. And then he turned to one of his assistants, who was a very wealthy man, one of the people working in his house. And he said to him, obviously in Russian, he wasn't not speaking to him, not in Yiddish, said, "Go to the basement and bring wine and put it down on the table." He wanted to see if the Alter Rebbe would end up drinking the wine which you're not allowed to drink. So the Alter Rebbe sat down by the table, took the cup of wine, and started to make the bracha. Now, this person was a frum Jew. He was not going to make another person pronounce Hashem's name in vain. His plan was that if he sees the Alter Rebbe is going to make the bracha, he'll stop him and say, "Don't, it's not kosher wine," because a non-Jew handled it. But what happened was the Alter Rebbe started to make the bracha. As he made the bracha, his face was transformed. His face was radiating such holiness. He never in his life saw someone make a simple bracha like that. And he was so stunned that he forgot what he wanted to say. And the Alter Rebbe finished the bracha. But instead of saying Bora Priya Gofen, he said Shahakal Nia B'dvaro. And then he said to him, by the way, this is not wine, this is honey wine. And honey wine is Shahakal. But right now you have a shaila on all the wine in your basement because this person went down to get the wine. That was the first Shalom Aleichem. And that's when he saw the Alter Rebbe is not an ordinary person. Then they spoke about Torah and about Chassidus, and he gave tremendous, sort of a report that, according to his opinion, the Alter Rebbe is a great tzaddik and a great leader, and so on and so forth. So again, that commitment the Alter Rebbe gave only increased to publicize more how Chassidus is the right thing. So the Alter Rebbe went out on a Tuesday night, and this was in Petersburg. It's not a place where there were Hasidim. In fact, the Alter Rebbe gave an order that there are 10 Hasidim that he's not allowing them to come to Petersburg, because if they would come, they would burn the place down. That doesn't mean they burn the place down with a torch. He meant with their davening and their learning, they would cause something miraculous to happen, that the Alter Rebbe should go out of jail, and that's not what he wanted. The Alter Rebbe wanted that he should go out of jail because the authorities in the government will be convinced that Chassidus is something positive, and Torah and Judaism is something positive, and on that basis they'll let him out, not because some sort of stronger force will overcome them and sort of beat them. So there weren't too many Yidden in Petersburg at that time. Those who lived there were usually simple Jews, businessmen, because in those days you weren't allowed to live in Petersburg unless you had a special permit. And why would one have a special permit? Only because of business. So they came to the Alter Rebbe and they asked him to say a Maimon Chassidus, which the Alter Rebbe did. And the Alter Rebbe said that on this Wednesday, Nitlu HaMa'eris. There's another word that can have two meanings, one the opposite of the other. Nitlu could be spelled like this: Nun, Tav, Lamed, Vav. And Nitlu could mean Nun, Tes, Lamed, Vav. This means to hang up, and this means to take away. The Alter Rebbe said, Nitla Ma'eris means the luminary, meaning the sun. Hashem put up the sun on Wednesday. So he said, on Wednesday, Hashem took away the luminary. That's the day that Hashem passed away. But on Wednesday, this Wednesday, after going out of jail, Hashem hung back up the luminaries to, meaning now Chassidus will be publicized and revealed in a way, in a very strong way. What we'll talk about tomorrow is what's found in a lot of all the sikhs, starting from the Alter Rebbe himself. What was the real reason that he was arrested? Basically, with two reasons. One reason of what was going on down here, and another reason what was going on up there. To be continued in Yud Hashem.